You know what? I'm going to take executive liberty here while they're miking up. Did any of you have one question to ask any of the panelists merely while they're getting their mics on from the last panel? So we answered all your questions. Oh, okay, one question.
So I was just thinking, you had the slide about the place, the rideshare in Spain, right? And you said something. There was something about as the number of people go up, it affects the number of. I'm sorry, I'm having a lot of trouble articulating. But you were saying something
go
about
up by worker.
Right. I was wondering if there was any thought to that about how agents might be part of that number or not, or is that crazy? I just a thought that jumped in my head, and I wasn't sure if anyone had any thoughts on that.
To the best of my knowledge, no one is yet looking at the number of agents, because agents are effectively non-rivaled. You can
Sure.
duplicate them as many as possible. So as far as I know, no one's introducing any legislation like that. The only thing that I do know they're doing is trying to design legislation to bite as hard as possible, thinking that fixed fines don't matter. So they're looking at scaling it with the number of workers or the number of incidences of problems. So I'm not aware of anything so far against the agents themselves.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Well, with that, I think we're just about mic'd up. So just about good timing on that. We have an unusually interesting panel with some really diverse talent. So I'm going to see if we have some folks from Dell Technologies, we have some folks from Glasswing Ventures, we have Accenture running these, and we've got some folks from the circular economy with quite remarkable backgrounds. So I'm going to pose a couple of questions then, but we're going to make sure that we leave time for you to ask a couple of questions along the way. So let me see if I can cover a few. We'll start, actually, we're going to do this alphabetically. Steve, Andon comes first, so we'll do this. Steve has a bit of a background. He started ReturnCenter early in the 2000s, creating a circular economy. He's been working with Dell, IBM, GM, Toyota, 25 years of entrepreneurial experience, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
Okay. We might even summarize, he may track your toaster's afterlife better than most people track their friends. He's been doing all of the details of the stuff that Peter was talking about. So we'll start with a first question. Actually, I got to give credit to Vivek for this question. Through the various tech evolutions, what patterns have you witnessed in returns of older tech that's now different for artificial intelligence? So what's happening there?
In a word, I would say it's speed. The advent of AI has essentially speeded up everything, not only our ability to produce content and information and use of AI in general, but the effect there is the speed of the life cycle of devices. They are being manufactured faster than ever. They're being obsolete faster than ever, and that accounts for both the endpoint device, like the laptops and the desktop devices that we all use, but especially in the cloud, the part that most of us don't see day to day. The useful life of devices in the cloud is shrinking at a really exponential rate. Just a couple of years ago, you would get 7 or 8 years out of a server life cycle in a data center. That's now approaching less than 2 years. Some people are saying 18 months right now. So a lot of the new data centers going in, the equipment is, the focus right now is on putting in the new, but the obsolescence is approaching faster than we can possibly expect. And there is a huge implication of that, not only the the cost of the flip over of all the equipment, but the circularity, the downstream on the whole aftermarket ecosystem associated with what it takes to generate servers, the raw materials, the manufacturing, and this all sets aside the whole energy topic as well in terms of massive increased demand on the energy to produce and run data centers. But in general, the big picture, the advent of AI has speeded up everything that we do, including our consumption rate, whether that's of energy or devices.
So I want to pull up some of our conversation. I thought you had some other elements too that I thought were going to be interesting. So not just the speed, but you also had comments on agentic AI, or even the protocols connecting the agents. Did you want to add something about that? Because that also felt like an additional difference compared to earlier technology. I don't know if you had further thoughts on that.
Can you clarify just a little bit more on your
Well,
question?
you mentioned like model context protocols, instead of APIs, as another way of connecting the agents together with something else that you, because you're not connecting one laptop to another laptop is different than an agent making decisions on behalf of another agent, or providing the context for that. I thought you had some arguments there.
So there's a really, when it comes to device lifecycle management and how long a device has a useful life, the concept of using AI to start to keep track of everything that is deployed, what is its useful life, how fast does it need to be replaced. We're currently working on a model to create agents that can be looking at the data associated with the devices themselves, be able to have a predictive analytics, and then connect that to the whole ecosystem of downstream functionality available with those devices. So there's a lot of information when a device is produced, whether that's stamped in the BIOS, or there's a lot of various ways to be able to capture a snapshot of not only when that device was produced and where it is, but all the components that go with it. And there's a lot of previously unstructured data that goes along with that concept. So being able to use AI agents to keep track of and predict when is a device going to fail, when is a device going to need to be upgraded, and being able to knit that together with a whole ecosystem of potential second lives, third lives, decommissioning, recycling, parts extraction, rare earth mineral extraction, and creating sort of the whole circular life cycle of what happens to all the components. AI can be a tremendous advantage in terms of just creating that circular intelligence, because it's no longer a nice to have. It's absolutely a must have at this point. We're as a planet, we're running out of the raw materials that are used to make a lot of these devices. That's a whole other topic. I'm sure that many of you have seen some of the reports, like how we get cobalt out of places like the Congo under horrific conditions and depleting supply. So the concept of leveraging AI to really fuel the premise of urban mining, right? Like taking the devices that are already in our closets and basements and warehouses, being able to effectively extract that and create true circularity for electronics.
So some wonderful, interesting issues on the rare earth minerals when we come back to the geopolitics and platforms later. So I appreciate that one. That's particularly interesting. David, I'd like to get you into the conversation.
Sure.
So for background, David is Senior Managing Director of Technology, North America for Accenture. Now, your LinkedIn profile says you've been there for 28 years. ChatGPT says you've been there for 34. Which is it?
Another example of ChatGPT getting it wrong. So 28 years.
Fantastic. So you've got a background in digital transformation, cybersecurity. You've led their frequent acquisitions. You've also been involved in developing the AI agent and zero trust models for that. So I think there's some really interesting possible questions there. Accenture is serving lots of competing different enterprises, maybe different competing enterprises in this room. And you're using AI-powered consulting methodologies. It'd be interesting about AI consultation. One question would be, how do you architect the data rights so that AI learning can cross client engagements and still respect the competitive advantage of the individual clients?
Yeah, so maybe a couple of things, and then I don't know if time allows, maybe I'll work in a little MCP and 8A in there for you. But first, just reflecting on the ChatGPT comment, maybe they're kind of thinking about it more in dog years and experience and pain, and that's how they got to the 34 versus the 28 years. There's probably a lot of reasons. There's lots of ways they could have gotten there. I mean, so to your question, it's kind of interesting. The first theme is I think there's three things to think about when we think about kind of consulting, AI-powered consulting, and protecting data rights. The first is just a general theme of transparency and trust. Right? That's kind of overarching behind this, being super transparent. That's causing us to rewrite data usage rules, the language, the legal language that we have with our clients. And then the third is this theme around really a technical understanding gap that exists with so many executives at different clients. So if I just kind of go through them, and you draw even a human parallel. In our business, when we talk about consulting, there's kind of a base expectation that a consultant goes across clients. And in fact, it's kind of a conundrum because our clients want all the experience of you having done work at other places, other clients in the industry and across industries, but still within the industry, which basically suggests that it's someone that there may be some competition with. So they want all that insight, but they don't want anything to leave their four walls. So even in the human side of this, we've had a lot of history of what does it mean to protect trade secrets and IP. And some of that today falls on, it may be things like non-competes. You can't go to a direct, work on a direct competitor for a year or two. But we're always very transparent about it. When we start talking about data usage rights now, we're actually in the Gen AI world and just kind of this whole new world of where consulting has evolved. All of our clients are expecting, should have said this first, all of our clients are expecting even more that we are delivering insight-driven consulting. They want our knowledge to be actually very data-driven. So that's increasing. The expectation of Gen AI is that it's even more, meaning they want data-driven insights from our other clients. But again, they don't want anything leaving their four walls. So now we're looking at rewriting what it means in data usage rights with our clients and saying, this is what we'd like to be able to leverage so that you get the benefit in future engagements as well. And that involves explaining and understanding where the trade secrets are, how we anonymize data, and transform specific data into learnings as opposed to a specific artifact or a specific sensitive data point that is going to be traced back to that client. And when I said, rewriting the data usage rights is a component of this, the other big component, though, is this whole technical gap in understanding. Because trying to explain to many executives, especially in the legal field, that the desire is to actually take learnings, not your artifacts, starting to explain what it means to transform individual data into vectorized data into learnings, and understanding that some of that is going to leave the four walls. There's an element of trust that comes in and technical know-how that says, I don't get it in the end. You're saying some of my learnings are going to end up being leveraged elsewhere. So these are some of the things that we're facing right now in working through and architecting solutions that involve how do we explain what happens to the data? How do we architect it so that there's an ingestion at our clients to be able to take some of these learnings and being explicitly transparent about what we're taking and what we would use it for to gain agreement that they want to participate in that. And then architecting a solution, by the way, that for the sensitive data, make sure that these agents will remain separate so that you'll never get into a scenario where you're actually leveraging some trade secret that another client never wants to leave its four walls.
Well, I've got a bunch more follow-on questions. I'll bring a couple of folks in the conversation.
Sure.
We'll come back maybe on the model context protocol and a couple others as well.
Yeah.
M is next.
There we go.
So you're next in the queue here.
Yeah.
All right. So we're going to figure out. So Vivek Mohindra, as Senior Vice President of Corporate Strategy at Dell, while he was at MIT, he spent his time learning Taekwondo, shooting pistols, and skydiving.
Yeah. That was on a strategy to graduate with my PhD if my advisor did not give it to me in time.
So
Yeah.
He also had this wonderfully interesting experience where I guess he was transitioning through Paris.
Yeah.
Right? They found some bottle on you, detained you for suspicion. They thought you were going to blow up the plane, and it was Ayurvedic medicine.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
They thought it was I was pushing drugs, not blowing up the planes, but yeah.
Well, we can now travel on planes with our shoes now.
That's true.
That has been another change as well. Vivek has been with Dell as a strategy officer. He's previously with McKinsey, TPZ Capital, Freescale Semiconductors. One really interesting idea is bringing AI to the data rather than moving the data to the AI. I think that's a genuinely interesting issue. You also say the addressable market is going to be increasing dramatically. I want to pull into this, or dig into this, edge AI and data sovereignty. What do you mean by bring AI to the data? Your philosophy is advocating processing it where the data lives rather than centralizing it. How do data rights and governance models evolve when AI processing is distributed across thousands of edge locations? Who's accountable when AI interference happens on customer premises using your infrastructure? How does that work?
Yeah, let me get to that. But there's one thing I did want to touch upon very briefly, which should make Steve really happy, and Peter's comment earlier, because we talked about laptops. The magnitude of the issue on circularity is much higher. We have 1.5 billion PCs in the install base. Half of them are 4+ years old. With the advent of AI PCs and the imminent retirement of Windows 10 and migration to Windows 11, that creates a massive issue for refresh, which obviously causes a big opportunity for you, Steve, and I know we have partnered closely together on that. So that's the magnitude of the opportunity. The bringing AI to the data, I read your paper on in situ data, so I'll refer to that. It's very well written, Marshall. I think from our perspective, when you look at certain facts, so 83% of the data today sits outside of the public clouds and the hyperscale, so it's truly distributed at the edge. Mm-hmm. When you look at the amount of data that is generated every year in exabytes at these edge devices, and you start thinking about the problem from that perspective, you quickly realize that transporting this massive amount of data to a central location poses security and cost implications. Excuse me. And then when you add to it the fact that the compute available in a centralized place, in a cloud, and tends to be relatively expensive, and when you look at the compute distribution of these edge devices with PCs, which have a lot of performant NPUs and et cetera on them, or on-prem, you have a pretty good footprint to economize on the energy and the cost infrastructure and how you can execute AI workloads. And that's the lens through which we were approaching. It's better to bring AI to the data than data to the AI for security and cost and energy efficiency perspectives. Now, in that world, I think as your in situ data point clearly points out too, where does the data reside? And then who owns that data? And then what is the implication for the actions that is conducted on that data? And where does the responsibility lie? I think, and as your paper correctly pointed out to Marshall, I fully subscribe to that. The wherever the data resides and whoever the originator is clearly owns the data. But then when you start thinking about what are you doing onto that data in terms of executing the workload, when it comes to people and policy and the process side of it, which is generally what organizations and individuals control, that's where the responsibility clearly lies. When you think about a provider like us in terms of Dell, our infrastructure enables what is occurring with that data. Mm-hmm. As long as the data belongs to you, which it does, a customer, and you control the policy and the people and the process side of it and can put the appropriate guardrails around how you're executing the workload, that's really the cleanest way to partition the responsibility, if you will. So at least that's one way we think about it.
Fantastic. All right. Just for a quick point for audience clarification, just with the language, in situ data rights would allow you to import the algorithm of your choice into the data wherever your infrastructure is resident, as opposed to data portability or ex situ, where you're taking it out of that infrastructure. Give you really simple insights to why that matters. Imagine you could port the Google algorithm into your Facebook profile. Well, then they would compete. You become the bottleneck, and now who captures the value? You do, rather than Google or Facebook. So if we can support these with infrastructure technologies like Dell or Accenture or others that are offering, the folks that own the data will capture more of that value as opposed to Amazon, Facebook, Google, and Meta. So it's another way of looking at exactly that problem.
Yeah.
That brings us to Cesare, the next one in the alphabet. So we have some interesting background. She founded Glasswing Ventures in 2016, one of the earliest firms focused on AI, an impressive, well before ChatGPT. 19 years investment experience, prior roles Microsoft's corporate development group, had led investments with CrowdTwist, Verizon, Chaos Search, serves on the board of M&T Bank, MSc Industrial Supply, Harvard Business School Executive Fellow. A little bit of a fun fact, she's from Albania. And something you wouldn't necessarily know, which I think is wonderful, she first landed in Louisiana where they had Southern accents, and she had a Southern accent for a while. Maybe you could favor us with a little bit of that Southern drawl?
Gone, long gone. I haven't lost my original accent, but that one I've lost.
Well, I'll be. Thanks very much. We have some wonderful issues in here. What about portfolio data synergies? With investments across AI-enabled companies, Chaos Search, Verizon, what opportunities are there for data sharing between these portfolio companies to enhance their models? Or are they in competition with one another, similar to the kinds of problems that Accenture might be facing with some of these tracing? Or another question would be, how you do the due diligence on these questions? How do you evaluate a good AI investment compared to some of the other opportunities?
Gosh, okay, so that's a broad enough question. I can take it in whatever direction. So fundamentally, at this point, we're managing right under $500 million in assets and in investments, and it's all an AI native portfolio, 2/3 B2B, including a lot in the supply chain, MRO, and other spaces, and about 1/3 in cyber. The cross-portfolio data sharing, not so much there. And the reason why is by virtue of what you do in a venture capital firm. You don't want 3 companies in any given fund to be competing with each other. And if you're so very close, and kind of both gentlemen to my right and my left touched on the topic of how hard it is to be dealing with third-party data, whether it is, hey, you can keep the data. I often say I could care less about data ownership. Everyone is worried about that data ownership walled garden. Keep it. Just let me have access. Train the model, and it has been a joy. And that's the reality of what we're all saying or implying. And of course, it's not very popular, if you tell that to a client or a customer. But the reality is, the moment that a model has been trained, you've extracted what you need out of the data. Doesn't mean that the data is rendered useless by any stretch. You can train it and use it for other purposes, but you can actually take that model and then leverage other sets of data, and then, as previously stated, bring it back to the value of the underlying client or customer from all the learnings. So this notion of cross data sharing, not as much. Tool sharing, model, transferring of learnings, absolutely. The other piece around, and I think we've taken this into the sort of data angle, so I'll go with that theme for a bit, is this notion of, we've always had issues, whether it's in the consumer context with your example of Meta and Google, or in the enterprise context, around who owns the data and how do you leverage the data. So at CSAIL across the street, I guess they're your brethren or cousins or something of that nature, Tim Berners-Lee, who previously invented the web, came up with a solid platform, I think, on partner to Accenture, which is basically enabling individuals and enterprises to control their data and then the ability to monetize it. So it's a distributed system. We are seeing a ton of pull around Solid and what's happening around that data in the market, particularly across financial services, banks. If you're following what Visa is doing around the models, where now they're going to enable consumers to connect with merchants and allow consumers to monetize their data by way of merchants and be able to do so in a compliant manner. So as all of us contemplate and invest in AI, and if we parse it into the data and the models, and I'll come back to the models, a lot is happening with the data and the data standards that maybe not the frontline sexy topic, but it's sort of where a lot of the attention is. I'll give you one more data point that I don't think we've touched. Workflows. Nobody has workflows, and we're talking about agents and what they can do, but how can the agent, even if it's, let's say we've sorted governance, does it sit above the human, below the human in the loop, but what are they reflecting? What workflow? The workflow is in our brains. It's the number 1, 2, and 3 challenge right now for CIOs and chief data officers. you're supposed to automate what? So, if any of you are developers, there's a lot of, when you code, there's a lot of documentation, pain in the behind as that is, that takes place. That doesn't take place for how the paralegal is talking to the, deputies, GC, to the CCO. You apply that to any context. So a lot of challenges. On models and algorithms, for the hour that I've been half an hour sitting in the background and listening to the prior presentations, I'd like to challenge us that actually we've defined AI very narrowly as Gen AI. Gen AI is this piece of what's happening in AI architectures. So it's transformers and attentions, really powerful in summarization, very little reasoning, despite all the rah-rah, we have a lot of headway we can make there. But it's this tiny piece. And by the way, it's largely inefficient. For all the integrated stack that was previously presented, make no mistakes, right now the biggest winner is NVIDIA. So don't rush to short the stock just yet. Literally orders of magnitude in revenue to them because large language models are so compute inefficient. Again, I will point across the street, watch what's happening in other areas of AI. So recurrent neural nets is a different type of architecture. The wrapper and the interface is all Gen AI and will remain. But look at what's happening with RNNs. Within those, you have something like a sub-architecture called liquid neural nets. So what it is doing is essentially today, if you're doing a tiny computation or a gigantic computation, the amount of data you need to feed through the pipe for the model, in Gen AI, is, think of it like I have this image of a concrete pipe. Tiny or big, the whole concrete pipe has to be filled. Therefore, your computational costs to the hyperscalers and NVIDIA are skyrocket. These guys have come up with a way, particularly around time series data, where they make those models expand or contract and expand depending on what the computation is. Wait a minute, that's a big deal. You've taken a fundamentally fixed cost that it's huge, making it variable. So I'd like to just challenge the thinking for the few seconds that I've left. Gen AI is a tiny, tiny piece, and we will be short-served, forget the long term, even in the medium and short term, if we equate it with AI, especially as you get into agents. And by the way, agents, even those we haven't defined, like we have different definitions even in the presentations, which is fascinating. It's typical for where we are in the scale of adoption. But even within the agents, like you have 5 different degrees of autonomy, not 2 are the same. I think we've all threatened to talk about MCP, which is an open standard for how agents can communicate so that it enables faster adoption and sort of deployment of agents. You have swarm models, you have hub and spoke models. So it's a mess, but a beautiful mess.
Wonderful, wonderful mess. Thanks. Well, so you're one of the ones that's most focused on making money specifically off of AI investments. What?
We are too, by the way. We are a for-profit company.
I'll come back.
I just want to make sure.
I'll come back to that.
Dell, the new not-for-profit.
Yeah, I know. That's. I just want to clarify.
For this audience, what are your top 3 AI investment tips? If you're going to choose to invest in AI, what top 3 tips would you give them?
So, one, I don't invest in AI. None of us should. We should invest in technology. Yes, everything I do is AI, but here's my point. We should invest in technologies that solve real problems with real ROIs that have defensibility. And if that is by way of AI or quantum or some other frontier tech, by all means. Very important. Doing AI for the sake of AI won't get you very far. I look for moats. Because, again, you saw the tech stacks. How do you define a moat as a little of startups, 2 or 3 gentlemen or ladies and a few unshowered developers that go compete with the incumbents, right? So I look for unique data access, back to my earlier point. So companies that are solving problems generally in verticals, supply chain, MRO, inventory management, real-time QAing in the manufacturing line, areas that are very sort of big market opportunity, big size, but vertically focused, something that the hyperscalers, as they move up and down the value chain, won't have an interest, or even if they have an interest, their own incumbency will refrain them from going into that space, because guess who's using their services? This company. So they have attempted it, but it's a scary attempt to compete with your customers. And sort of where you are solving problems, so moats around data access, moats around the types of problems, and where the problem cannot be solved with another run-of-the-mill software technology. Sometimes we want to deploy AI for the sake of it. The ROI has to be orders of magnitude better. Like a 10% or 20% doesn't cut it in this era.
Mm-hmm. Fabulous. All right, we expect all you guys to be making lots of money after this. David, this is a question I just have to ask, and I think a lot of the folks in the audience would be curious. What is AI doing to white-collar labor? Is it affecting consulting? Is it increasing productivity? Is it replacing? What's AI doing? And how are you going to do that for your clients?
Well, I think the immediacy of it is it's actually increasing productivity. We have all sorts of studies that talk about where we've interviewed how many employees are actually leveraging AI, and the numbers have gone up exponentially. So everybody's experimenting with it, playing with it. Maybe the counter side to that data point, though, is how many are exposing that they are actually using AI in the assistance of their job today, and it is an extraordinarily low number. And the question is why? So they're seeing the productivity gains even today by just using something like ChatGPT or Grok as a co-pilot. But quite frankly, what we're exposing...
I hope they're not using Grok. I really hope. I'm sorry.
I had to bring that up to get the reaction.
You got it. Please don't.
Even Grok 4, any variant thereof?
We're going to get into politics very quickly.
No,
okay.
we're not.
All right.
Human judgment, not quality judgment.
But what we are seeing...
We're going to add you to the geopolitics panel later.
What we are seeing, though, is there's a hesitation to reveal that we're actually using AI to gain more productivity. And that is for fear of what does it mean to expose to management that actually some of my tasks are being augmented now with AI. One of the things that we're advising clients around is we've got to go with the human in the loop component that we talk about. We've got to make it safe and get to a point where it's encouraged, because the productivity gains that'll come out of it will be even higher. That's what's happening today. Now, of course, the question becomes, what are the possibilities and what does it actually do in the future as we move to more agentic architectures? Are entire roles going to go away? And every conclusion we still come to is that in mass, what it's going to do is allow individuals to be more productive and move to higher order activities. Even when we talk about in the consulting business where a lot of our work is, we do a ton of work in back office, finance and accounting, HR, administrative. The opportunity to do more, even in our business, in the front office components of this, of how do we actually think about embedding AI into our clients' very products and services themselves? How do we create that the value that we're going to create is going to move to a higher order, because we are less focused on some of these activities that are around things like cost optimization, and can we get one more degree of savings out of this back-end process. Now it's about how do we make the products and services even better, and that's where we think it's going to direct more of our talent.
Great. So, all right, so let's get back to the profits question.
Yeah.
And see if we can actually make sure that Dell's making all money hand over fist. You raised this interesting question about, get back to things like model context protocol on that. So explain to the audience, what the heck is that? What's it? Why is it the next generation of AI? How would you take advantage of that to run business more effectively? Or what would you do with all of that?
Yeah, I think, look, this is an emerging field. I think model context protocol, which I think Anthropic conceived of in July of last year, November it was released, and then on the back of that, a whole consortium launched A2A, the agent-to-agent protocol. I think as we get into these agentic implementations, which are fundamentally, I like the word you use, workflows, which is, we also think about skills. You have data, you have workflows that need to capture whatever the business process is, and then the skills of the organization, ultimately they all get encapsulated in some sort of an agent which executes something. The issue becomes, how do you transfer the context between these two different types of agents? And how do you ensure both discoverability and interoperability, which is where these MCP and A2A come in. And I know the whole world is caught up with that and thinks that is the answer, but it is part of the answer. Because when you really think about what are all the other questions that need to get answered in terms of trust, verification, entitlement of data, what goes from one side to the other. Just to give you an example, we're thinking about MCP and A2A and actively thinking about how do we implement it in our agentic flows, but we also know that all these LLMs are by and large trained on order of 1 petabyte worth of data. Companies like ours have hundreds of petabytes of data, which is really capturing a lot of the uniqueness we have. But then thinking about which portion of that data should get encapsulated or captured through a workflow and skill into an agent. Do different parts of the organization, how do they interact with each other, and what is the entitlement, because obviously some of the data you cannot freely pass around. And then I know we talked about agentic purchasing before. Now imagine you extend it all to multiple companies where these agent-to-agent transactions are happening. Again, I think MCP and A2A are terrific protocols, but they're necessary, but not sufficient with all the issues that we need to still solve through.
Great. So lots of different opportunities. Did you have any other comments on that? I know some of us want to jump on the MCP, but if not, I'm happy to move to the next question.
The only thing I would add on it is, again, on the theme that I ended with on the first question, which is technical understanding of our clients. So there's kind of two things that are in my mind all the time in talking to the big enterprises that we work with. And when we get to the first is, they see the power of LLMs, they see what's capable out there, but the biggest gap that we have at these enterprises is what it means to actually ingest their own data to actually be able to leverage the power of LLMs. And I'm going to get to MCP and A2A on here. So you talk about, everybody sees and can pilot fun things on with Gen AI, but what they're really doing is mostly kind of stuffing the context window with a number of, with a bit of, a subset of their data. And what we talk a lot about is, what is the ingestion architecture to actually take those petabytes of data, the relevant parts of it when we think about it from an end-to-end workflow, ingest it, and convert that to usable knowledge. So that in itself is still a massive learning curve for a lot of large organizations. It's complicated. But then you go a step further and you start talking about agents talking to other agents. And there is still a pervasiveness out in many enterprises that are still looking at this very much like APIs and don't really understand what it means when we talk about things like, hold on, there is a context. It is no longer I'm going to call another function on an API with a handful of variables. And we have a lot of organizations that are infatuated with, hold on, I need to increase the speed of deployment. My disparate IT legacy systems that are out here right now, from ideation to actually getting something into production, is so long. And they start to think about reusable libraries of APIs. And this is kind of a whole new revolution of, hold on a minute, it doesn't work like that. It's no longer 4 parameters that are going out here. This whole world of what an agent is actually capable of how we start thinking about context being passed and intention. And this is, the end point of where I'm going is the learning curve here to be able to drive the adoption of all of this is so big out there in the enterprise. This is where all the opportunity is.
Yeah.
So clearly some interesting business opportunities on Steve, I think a good point for you to get back in on the interconnectedness of this. If we've got agents talking to other agents, and you've got, how are you going to perform autonomous logistics systems when these agents are controlled by different entities? How do you handle that logistics problem? They have different goals and interests.
They do. I think that's a big part of the whole concept of governance of a platform, is if you in terms of when we look at the use of AI and agents across a platform, the primary use that we see right now is going back to what you were just referring to around sort of replacing APIs with AI and creating agents that can be looking at unstructured data, turning it into structured data, and communicating with other agents that are doing the same at the other end of the platform. And so in that context, like if you're running the platform as the platform owner, the concept of governance and control around how those things are interoperating is the critical thing that I think you're responsible for as the platform owner. There's only so open you can make it before you start running into what could even be like considered a conflict of interest of agents, right? And where does the decision making land, and what are the priorities? I think in terms of like creating the agents and how they function and how they're making decisions is the key. I think the key responsibility of the platform owner, and it really becomes a very interesting landscape in terms of like the overall role and scalability of a platform. I kind of see platforms as like these solar systems that turn into galaxies, right? I mean, there's an endless number of interconnected parties, and if those parties have their own AI agents talking to each other, you can start creating a mess. the technical term for it. But anyway, I think in the world of creating a platform, you got to be really, really careful and really deliberate about how decisions are being made. It's not all autonomous, and the rule set that you define, there's sort of a rules engine that you're defining in the creation of agents is critical.
So for audience benefit, I want to double down on something Steve just said, and I'm quite serious about this. I think one of the things you pointed out is as these things move more increasingly agentic across different systems, governance is going to become an absolutely critical skill. And I think that is grossly underappreciated across platform businesses. I'll actually come back to that later in the day. So Steve, I want to thank you for highlighting that. That is a really, really essential skill. If you think of the value being created by the interactions, the question is, when do market failures happen? When there's information asymmetry, so someone gets cheated. When there's monopoly, so someone has disproportionate power. When is there agency problems, so one party is getting exploited another? When are there externalities? Information has huge externalities. All of these are governance problems. So Steve, I want to thank you for that. So I want to do two things now. One of these, I'm going to ask a broad question to all the panelists, in case anyone wants to jump in for those. While I'm doing that, I invite anyone that wants to ask any question of any panelist to come up while I pose this question. So you can please join us at this microphone or that microphone. And you're welcome to pose anything to Steve, David, Marina, Vivek, and yes, very profitable questions.
Yes.
Or questions on Grok. Actually, I appreciate you, Tom. Thank you for that. So you can ask questions on that as well. So please come up and participate. While I do that, I'm going to throw out a question for everyone. So anyone sees it, whoever thinks has got an interesting comment or take on it. What about human-AI collaboration? As AI agents become more autonomous, how do you envision the evolution of the human role in your respective industries? What new skills professionals need to effectively supervise or collaborate with AI agents?
Well, look, I think very quickly, I'll be brief. I think others have touched on it, including David. I think the role of humans is really important. The best way we think about it and conceptualize it, agents will become part of the workforce, and just like any workforce which has different stratified skills and you give them different responsibilities, we'll have to think about that. And ultimately, everybody will become a manager. They will not be a manager of people. They will be work managers, and they're managing an ensemble of other people and other agents. And that's really how we will have to think about it. And with these agentic flows, you'll start breaking down the boundaries between organizations. So we'll fundamentally have to rethink organization structures as well. And all of that is active. We are actively thinking and discussing that internally at Dell right now.
Interesting. Any other comments from you? consulting?
I'll
or
just say that
VC?
I completely agree. I think we'll probably have peer-to-peer relationships and managerial relationships. But I also want to emphasize that we are a ways away from anyone being comfortable at a governance level or operational level to let agents run amok. I mean, we kind of talk about the future, and I live in the future, 5 to 10 years usually out. But if you come to the present, right now, the best case we would have for any true agents that might be getting deployed, and it's this tiny, the reality is that it's definitely a human in the loop dynamic, and no one is taking their hand off the wheel to just let the agents run amok, and that's extremely important. It ties back to governance, and the complexity is very well underscored here, will be quite high. But in reality, it's going to reflect the complexity of dynamics we have in our business interactions. You have companies that get exploited and companies that have monopolies today, sort of on the asymmetry of information. It will just be a much more automated way of doing so, and unfortunately not truly rules-based if we are going with modern AI and deep learning architectures, because they will have freedoms of operation. And that, I wish it were as clear as classical ML, where you define the rules and they didn't deviate. Therein actually, in fact, lies the complexity. But like for venture capital and for what I do, the entire function is changing. And like literally I have a meeting this afternoon where we are going through every facet of what the firm does, and basically I want a 3x year-over-year productivity on everything. Not quite agents, we can call them agents and they make them sound sexy, but it's really around AIification, I call it, of the firm.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah,
Interesting.
and I know I touched already on it, a little bit of the importance of the human in the loop in building trust in humans, that this is where it's going. I think every organization needs to be a bit transparent on what the intention is with agents, and so that we can embrace them more and understand what they're going to do in the workflow. I think I very much agree with Vivek on, I think that what we are going to see is it's going to empower people to be more connected across a workflow instead of siloed in one workflow. And I think that's going to unlock a lot more productivity. I also believe, just because we've touched on this, when you start thinking about the cybersecurity implications of this, we're also looking at agents now being delegates to actually do work on someone's behalf. So you go back to where the human in the loop on this is, the opportunity and the threats that are introduced with all of this agentic architecture is a whole other topic of now, as part of my workflow, this is not me going and entering a key and saying, I'm going to do this and my signature is on it, but there's going to be a lot more that agents are going to do on my behalf. So I think that's a whole other part of this as we become managers of agents doing work on our behalf. That also opens up whole new threats in the ecosystem.
Yeah.
So I'll share an observation. Actually, Bengt, if you have a question, please come on up.
There's one over there.
Please, yep. Yeah, please, go ahead. With like our first question over here, sure. Or, and Bengt, please stand in line. We'll have you next.
Hello. So thank you for the great discussion. And anyone can take it up. What is the one area that you all think, or any one of you think, we should slow down and we are not when it comes to the use of AI agents? This is specifically AI agents. One area where we should slow down the speed at which we are moving.
Well, I mean, I think there's also my view, there's a misperception that we are moving really fast on agents, because people who are actually trying to implement them, exactly to your point, are beginning to realize, well, I got to figure out where the data resides, I got to figure out what the workflow is, I got to make sure I set up the right guardrails around it. So most companies actually are being very thoughtful about it, and it is not moving at the pace at which you would imagine it is moving. So, which is to say, I think most companies are acting very responsibly and thinking through the guardrails and how do you implement it with security, et cetera, before they go about implementing it.
And I'll build on that along two lines. One, I think earlier you said, it might have been Marshall, so that said, we saw the tipping point on AI adoption in a 20 to 24 month and a 2-year window. It was actually much longer. So the paper around Gen AI, which was called Attention is All You Need, was written out of the University of Toronto in 2017.
Yeah, that's right.
And the tipping point was when ChatGPT became mass consumerization. So my 12-year-old can exploit it, and grandma can hug the computer because he's so funny, right? So that's really, so that did happen in 2 years. But as much as it feels like it's coming at us, it's a faster curve, no question about it, but it is a slower curve of adoption than you think. And secondly, if you really truly look at the adoption at scale, believe it or not, like if you checked Databricks, and they just had their conference about a month ago, and they talked about where the revenue was coming from, it was actually classical machine learning. So, Gen AI, and leave alone agents that we're talking about here, is still sort of mostly in experimental phase, albeit I bet you 12 months from now we'll have a different discussion. But the grand majority of spend is going into classical ML, so from regressions to clustering. Why? Because it's trusted and well understood. So, they have the guardrails, and they're sort of getting the data in order and applying those tools. So, yes, fast, but not as fast as one might think. Don't be quite scared.
Well, actually, to supplement that, Marvin Minsky was writing on perceptrons here in the 70s.
Yeah.
So it's been a while. Thanks.
Thanks. I have a question. Where is Palantir in this whole story? Because you mentioned, you were interested in this governance, you were interested in how to sort of go, perhaps expressed as from syntax to semantics, because large language models are all about talking. I don't know how familiar you are with Palantir, but it's making big waves and big companies. It's not such a pleasant company necessarily, but it seems to have, for me as an economist, it seems to me to make a lot of sense to try to integrate silos, not by restructuring them, but actually go above and orchestrate the whole company. So are you familiar with this? I mean, it speaks to the governance, and they allegedly have a solution to it.
I'll touch on Palantir, but then others can wait. So Palantir has been an interesting technology company, and I put it in air quotes because it's actually a services company with some tech. So if anything, I would put them closer to Accenture than I would put them to a pure play technology company. And they started with the security market, and a lot of what they were doing, particularly within three-letter agencies and police workforce and whatnot. I think what I'm watching them do is expand in verticals. So I don't know if you recall, but earlier I said where I find defensibility for my business is go into verticals. So they kind of have a strong domain and hold on the government with the government contracts, and I'm seeing them very actively in procurement, shipment, so sort of almost like the core parts of the economy. And the reason that they get my attention, in addition to, hey, I might have companies that they're coming, head on with in different verticals, is that they've actually modernized and made the services model as a venture-backed company sexy again. We look for 90% margins. Service margins of 30%, EBITDA is something that we historically run, for the hills. They have really shaped it that way. So it's not quite your question, but they are the answer. My answer that I can address is that they have done something very unique around services and really reopened that possibility to get major funding. And they're going after core parts of the economy to service rather than try to compete head on with the Google or sort of the cutting edge tech players. But that's my 2 cents.
And I'll add just 2 quick things to it. I think their focus to some of the earlier discussion is on process piece of it, making sure that you capture the process. And the second, to the vertical point, the whole concept of forward deployed engineer, which is fundamentally a consulting services, and either domain specific or vertical specific, and then feeding it back to the product side of it to actually capture that in the product side. So it's an example of other companies which are also approaching the problem from that perspective.
And then from a services lens, I have so many comments, I don't even know where to start. But I won't comment necessarily on the kind of work they're doing. I think you kind of did that well with the three-letter agencies. But I think if you think about some of the business model that they have, there is a general trend towards they had a service that took a lot of the data out from their clients and then tried to process that to find value. And I think in the age of AI right now, that actually goes exactly to the biggest barrier that we're seeing most of our clients be able to take advantage of with Gen AI, which is how do I extract my data out and then find the value in it? Now all of a sudden those assets that a lot of clients have had for years on, hey, we want to extract some of your data out, we already have the legal language, but now we can actually apply even better tools to it, better agents to go and find the value. And I think there's some sentiment out there that, and I talk a lot about this on things like management consulting is dead. Is management consulting dead? Do we want clients anymore to go and pay 12 weeks to get a PowerPoint when they hire a services company, a technology services company? Or do they want to hire in at the end of 12 weeks, there's actually some operable technology that goes in, and it goes directly to the forward deployed engineers of can we extract data, can we find the value and optimize it, and can we actually have working technology that's in that model at the end of that period? So we think a lot about this at Accenture. I think a lot about this, and think about, one of our differentiators is we have 800,000 employees. So it's how do we get a forward deployed engineering model in the right circumstances, but then have the industrialization on how do we actually build that so it wasn't just a one-time use kind of case, but actually we're scaling or creating the technology platform behind it that allows it to scale securely.
So we have another question.
Yeah.
This is more of a legal mix with some of these you said earlier about agentic AI. People are also using the small language, large language models. What is the duty for disclosure to your clients that a substantial portion of the workload that's being done in some organizations is actually being done by various forms of AI? Say, like for example, you're doing an audit and you're looking at people's paperwork and you're looking at their policies and an AI is just going through and reading them and making a policy statement. Is there any responsibility to report that back to the customer saying, hey, this is what we're doing? Just
so that might have been to one of the points that I mentioned earlier, but Marshall, I don't want to jump the queue.
No, please.
Okay. I'm not a lawyer. I didn't sleep in a Holiday Inn Express last night. So the answer is simply this. Our view is an absolute obligation. I mean, the only reason we have clients is transparency and trust. And I think, back to like Warren Buffett's quote, but I know there's a million of these, right? The reputation is built over 20 years. It can be lost in 5 minutes, right? We have to be extremely transparent about any data that we consume that ever leaves the four walls. There isn't an MSA that we have with a single enterprise that isn't super explicit about it. But what's had to happen now with when we want to consume this data is we're actually rewriting with a tremendous amount of transparency around what does it mean to have data usage rights. So that we have our legal team has never been busier having those conversations. And again, it kind of goes to a minor point of then also explaining what ends up leaving the four walls is just really complicated for the lawyers right now because it's kind of sounds like something leaves my four walls. And that goes back to the whole concept again of transforming things into learnings. How do we take learnings? Humans take learnings. But where that line is between we're taking knowledge and learning versus we're taking specific facts and data points that are the trade secrets and IP that you don't want to lose. But the simple answer to your question is to be an ethical company, which I've been here 28 years and I believe we are, there is no circumstance that we would ever do anything that ever involved any data leaving their four walls without explicit understanding and permission to do so.
And I'll add to that from a tech perspective that we're actually, I have a company in my portfolio called Flux, developing platforms and tools that go and audit what is human generated, what is AI generated for both, ethical and explainability, but also compliance and governance. And then, of course, you get into the security because I think the footprint of the enterprise is getting bigger, the digital footprint, and therefore more entry points for cybersecurity, exploitation, and attacks. But fundamentally, you have the legal aspect of it, and it's actually getting codified, and businesses are being built around that governance, compliance, and explainability and ability to audit.
One quick point I'll mention from our customers I hear all the time, and this is we'll go into a longer conversation. Once data becomes knowledge and you're taking knowledge, and that is part of a model waits. There's no undo button on that. But you have suddenly, even though you may be preserving the data layer, but you have just transferred all the things that are critical to a company. How do you preserve that? But it's a much longer conversation.
So I want to jump in, and so we're doing very well on time. So I was going to give you each a moment to actually say the answer to one question. If you can look across data, AI, platforms, what one tip, what one insight would you share with this audience? I was going to start just down the list, Vivek.
I was going to point it to Steve, so I have time to think. But
I'll go back in reverse as you start immediately on the left. I don't know if you have.
So as we think about data, AI, and platforms, what is one thing?
So I'll give you a choice. The other question I had remaining, I was going to.
No, let's go with that one. Okay, that's fine. But if you want to repeat that one, that would be good.
So across anything on data rights, anything on artificial intelligence and platforms, what one insight would you leave the audience with?
I think one insight I would leave the audience with, and it's been our experience, is that the AI strategy has to be in support of a business strategy, which bleeds then into the use cases, then goes into the data that you need to execute that, and it necessarily goes into processes and workflows. So extracting the value really does require thinking about it end to end, but it has to be anchored to the business strategy.
Good. Rudina?
I was going to say something similar, so now I've got to, come up. Well, flexibility in ongoing training and retraining of yourself, not in a big, I'm going to leave my job and go for 3 months and get this course. I think the tools and how we approach our roles are going to evolve and just be part of that stream. So we're not the frog getting dumped into hot water. We're growing with the temperature, whatever that analogy is. And perhaps a bit of tongue in cheek, but watch your teenage kids and their behavior with technology. They're always a very, very good indicator of how things are going to get adopted. If you're writing an email from scratch, you're doing yourself a disservice these days. If you are not having tools that tie your calendar with your Uber app, with whatever else, think again. You are doing your own selves a disservice, and you don't have to go very far. Just look at your kids or nieces and nephews, and you kind of get a quick sense. But I think it's this notion of being ready to live with change.
Wonderful. So David, data rights, platforms, AI, what do you
I'll
recommend?
build off Vivek's comment a minute too, and it's funny because I was going to go the same place. So
Thank God I went first.
Yeah, exactly. You wanted to go the other way. So he stalled successfully to get another moment to think, and that was brilliant. Every conversation that I have with business executives, it always is when they always say, "How do we start?" It's always start with a business outcome in mind, the end-to-end workflow. So that was already said. I think the additional insight I would put on that, though, in the same sentence, I also say, however, IT and technology cannot be caught flat-footed in it, because the business outcomes are actually not that hard to define. And say, yes, if I had a brain, I would want it to do this. So pretty quickly, those outcomes are defined. But we very also quickly turn back to the technology, the technologists in the organization we talk to and say, so what does it mean to be enabled to be able to industrialize and capture that business outcome? And that is where we are finding a lot of folks that are just completely flat-footed on what does it mean to be able to convert our information, our petabytes, into usable knowledge and learnings, and to have a platform that is secure, scalable, that it can actually take advantage of that business outcome and make it industrialized for production.
I would add, there's one we often hand over, is that technology is often strategy. It's not just infrastructure. You often need to be very careful about what's the business objective and use it for strategy.
Yes.
Steve?
I think I'd like to give you more of a little less of a literal and specific answer, and I think a little more of a philosophical answer. Going back to your previous question about what's the role of humans going forward. And I think that is to say that AI platforms, all these things, to remember that they're tools and they're created by us for us. I think the human role is to be the boss of the tools. And I think people kind of forget that, especially with AI. They feel like it's kind of happening to them, or it's this out of control thing. And I feel like the analogy I think of is I have a friend who's a ski instructor, and he said the thing that he teaches people first when they're beginners and they get on the skis and they feel like they're very out of control and the skis are just going away is that he lets them know, like, you have agency. You have some control here. You're not just riding on something that's taking you away, but you have some control over what's happening. And he said he sees the light bulb go off for people when they realize that they can make the ski stop, or they can slow down. And I feel like AI and all of these things that we're talking about are in that same category. We all, as business leaders, as academics, as people with an impact on the world, we all have a choice about how we're using AI, how we deploy it, what we're using it for, what's the strategy. And I think our role as humans is to use the tools and enjoy the benefit, right? And any tool is like that. It doesn't matter, we started off a long time ago making tools like hammers, right? And then the tools got more sophisticated. Maybe they're sewing machines or bulldozers or whatever. And now we've got this really powerful, intelligent tool called AI. And we just have to remember it's for us. Like, we're the boss. We have some agency over it and how we use it. And that comes down to all your little decisions about, like, am I using it on my data? Am I sharing my data with the rest of the world? Am I training the bigger cloud, or am I keeping it private? Realizing that these things are like all choices, and it's what we put in is what we're going to get out. So, like, realizing we having that agency and not feeling like it's all just running away as a trend that we can't control.
Fantastic. Well, with that, I'd like to thank the panelists. Please give them a big hand.
Thank you, Marshall. Thank you.